the history of Atari, and how one company changed entertainment forever. Today, I want to take you back.
What we gonna do right here is go back. Way back. Back into time.
Before high definition graphics, before online multiplayers, before video games were a global industry with hundreds of billions and millions of dollars. This is the story of Atari, a company that didn't just make games, it helped invent an entire new form of entertainment. Crazy, huh? Let's go to the birth of Atari, 1972. Atari was founded in 1972 by Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney in Silicon Valley. That's in California, y'all. At the time, computers were massive machines owned by universities and corporations. And the idea that anyone or any person can interact with a computer, let alone play games, seemed almost impossible. Because most of these computers were the size of buildings. So we're talking, no one had the money to build like a big old computer the size of a house. So they were working towards making computers smaller and also making them for the people, right? So, sounds good in theory anyway. So, Bushnell was inspired by an early computer game called Space War. He believed it was something radical. He believed interactive entertainment could be fun, accessible, and profitable. He even named the company Atari that reflected his mindset. The word Atari comes from a Japanese game, Go. Atari wasn't just entering the game, it was about to change it. Let's talk about where it first started. The game would be called Pong. That would be my first introduction to video games, was probably Pong. Later that year, 1972, Atari released Pong. It came with 2 paddles, a bouncing ball, and a scoreboard. That's it. But crazy enough, Pong is revolutionary. Atari placed a prototype machine in a local bar, and something incredible happened. The machine actually stopped working. Not because it was broke. It was overfilled with coins. People couldn't. Yeah, I'm talking Pong, folks. A doop, doop, Pong Pong. Yep. They were in business. Arcades exploded in popularity. Atari quickly became the leader of a brand new industry. All right, let's move up a little bit. Let's move out throughout the 70s. We're going to talk about the golden age of arcades. Throughout the 1970s, Atari entered in many were called the golden age. The company released a lineup of arcades called like Asteroids, Centipedes, Missile Command, Breakdown, and many more. These games were simple to learn but hard to master. They rewarded skill, competition, and high scores, but they kept people coming back for more, which means more money, more money, more money. Arcades became social spaces. Video games weren't just entertainment anymore, they were culture. But Atari was about to make an even bigger move. So let's go to 1977. Bringing video games home. Yep, this is where my wheelhouse is. In 1977, Atari released a computer video game system called the Atari 2600. This was a game changer. By the way, this was my first introduction into home gaming. I did have an Atari 2600 with the wood grain. Yep, that's me. So instead of being locked inside of an arcade cabinet, players can now bring the games into their homes and use interactive cartridges. The idea became the foundation of every single model game that followed. Titles like Space Invaders, Pitfall, Adventure turned living rooms into arcades. By the early 1980s, Atari pretty much dominated the whole game market. They were technically video games mainstream. All that growth and rapidly can be a problem. So, in 1976, shout out to 50-year-olds like myself, Atari was purchased by Warner Communications. The money helped grow Atari fast, but it also brought intense corporate pressure. The company expanded too quickly. There was poor management, little control, and programs were overworked and underappreciated. Kind of sounds like modern games, folks. I'm just saying. I guess the crazy part is that Atari didn't even credit their developers, and that actually made a lot of them leave. A lot of these developers actually built some of the companies we look at today, like Activision. Many of the founding fathers of Activision are actually former Atari employees. I know you guys hate Activision now, but Activision is truly a pioneer. Activision is technically the first third-party game developer. So most video game companies at the time made their games in-house. So Activision is technically a pioneer for being the first third-party game developer. The more you know, right? And at the same time, Atari flooded the game with too many games, and most of them were rushed and not good. This led to the breaking point. Let's fast forward to 1983. The whole video game industry collapsed in 1983. And two pieces of Atari's downfall was the rushed version of Pac-Man for the Atari 2600 and E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Crazy part is, they developed the E.T. game in like 5 weeks. And I don't know about you, even in the old days, 5 weeks is way too soon. But, kinda sounds like modern gaming. Only thing different between now and past gaming, now they can just give you a 2-hour patch to fill in all the blanks they didn't do at launch. Yeah, you know who you are, Call of Duty. You know who you are. Yeah, I'm throwing shade. Consumers stopped buying games altogether. They had millions of cartridges that they didn't sell. They took all the unused games and threw them in the New Mexico landfill. That is true. That is not an urban legend. You can actually look that up. Okay. Made a quick stop to the video, right? Because everybody talks about the video game crash in 1983, but it's a little different than you think. I actually lived through it. First of all, no one knew the video game industry kind of crashed. Actually, it was a really cool time for consumers who played a lot of Atari games. For me, I was a young kid. I didn't have a job. I'm in elementary school. And all I know is all my favorite games that I've ever wanted to buy are now dirt cheap. So this was a great time if you're a consumer and you're a video game player at that point, because all the best games were like $1 or $2. So it hit the industry in a bad place, but for consumers, if you were still playing video games at the time, you had all the games. There was no reason you didn't have all the games, because all the best games were $1.50 at best. We used to go to the discount stores and just get handfuls for $10 and still have change for lunch. That's how cheap these games were at the time. So it wasn't all doom and gloom. It wasn't like everybody was, rest in peace, video games. Nah, for consumers who usually would have a hard time trying to get the games they want, this was a perfect time. So I'm going to get you guys back to the video. I just wanted to give you that perspective, because that time frame did not suck. It was awesome. All right, back to the video. Their decline, their reinvention, and their legacy. After the crash, Atari was broken up and sold into parts. New competitors rose like Nintendo and Sega, which revived the gaming industry and gave us new iconic characters like Sonic and Mario. Atari attempted several comebacks. However, they could never get back to that success they had in the late 70s and early 80s. But even as today, as of 2026, Atari still lives on. They're still making retro cartridges. They're still making retro games. And you can still find them in the marketplace. Not bad for a 50-year-old game system, right? Atari just wasn't about making video games. It was about creativity, ambition, and the risk of moving too fast. Hope you enjoyed my documentary. I'll catch you next time. Peace out.